We are recording now. So welcome everybody. Today is May 24th, 2018. This is the SIG VMware bi-weekly meeting. And we anticipate a short meeting today because the agenda is pretty short. That means we're going to have time for discussion at the end of this meeting. If you guys have any question or anything you want to discuss. Let's kick it off with some community updates. I guess that Stephen, you can take it off.
Okay. This update, a lot of it is going to overlap with what went on last week in the Kubernetes storage SIG, but some of it was within scope of any user running Kubernetes on top of vSphere infrastructure. So we've got efforts underway to move storage plugins from in-tree to a CSI architecture. And one of those, the vSphere plugin is, that ball is already in the air for implementing a CSI storage plugin. The other one, the Photon storage plugin, will be deprecated, so there won't be a CSI implementation of that, although the legacy one will continue to be available for some time, according to the Kubernetes project retirement policies. We also started an effort to engage in some continuous integration automated testing for the vSphere cloud provider, originating in the storage SIG. So this is going to mean that we're going to have continuous test cases run against Kubernetes, and there will be some VMware engineering efforts put on that. But if there's anybody on this call coming from other organizations, including users, we'd welcome other contributors, even if all you've got to contribute is specific use cases that you'd like to see covered in some of those test cases. I'd invite you to throw it out there either in this meeting during Q&A or add it to the, add it as a question or response on the Google Plus group for either this SIG or the storage SIG. I think we'll monitor either one of those. I think the final thing I'll throw out there is that I'm working with Michael Gash on a blog article on best practices for running Kubernetes on vSphere infrastructure in a production environment. I don't know if you're on the call, but Bryson Shepard was here at least a couple meetings ago and was the one whose questions during the SIG resulted in this effort to do the blog. So if you're out there, or if any other users are out there, I'd appreciate some reviewers of the draft of this blog from a user perspective, just to see if I'm going down the right path of answering all the questions you might have as you try to deploy Kubernetes in production on-prem on VMware infrastructure. And Fabio, I guess that's it for me. I'll turn it back to you. Sure.
Let's get over a few updates on the active projects that we have in the SIG. So we talked about the cloud provider project a few times already. There have been some movements on that. We actually had a few updates from this week, from the past 2 days actually. So we finally have a repository for cloud provider vSphere. So we have under the Kubernetes organization on GitHub, we have Kubernetes / cloud provider vSphere, which is the new home for the new Auto 3 cloud provider we're working on. We actually had our first weekly sync up for the cloud provider work yesterday. There's a recurring meeting that happens every Wednesday at, I'm gonna get the time right. It's 9:30 a.m. Pacific. It's 6:30 p.m. Central European time. Not sure all the other time zones, but you can figure it out yourself. Actually have a PR open to add that meeting to the SIG VMware page under the Kubernetes community repo on GitHub. I think I've seen some notifications that the PR was merged like a few minutes ago, so it's out there. I also updated the page with the link to the recordings, both for SIG VMware, so this meeting, and as well as the meeting that we had yesterday for cloud provider sync. And that is pretty much the update for cloud provider vSphere. We're gonna have a meeting with the people that are currently in the approvers list for the cloud provider, which are mainly people from VMware, from the storage storage and availability business unit of VMware. We're gonna have a meeting with them to start the process of taking over become part of the approvers team for that. It's gonna take a couple of days at least. Also, VMware folks have a conference next week, an internal conference called Radio. So most of us will be there, and it's going to be a slow week for all the other work happening. So that is probably going to slow things down a little bit, but hopefully by maybe not next week, but the week after, we're going to have an update on that, and we're probably going to start working on code. I just want to remember that the plan that we have doesn't necessarily include any code contributions on the cloud provider side for 1.11. Actually, the 1.11 release cycle was supposed to just have us getting the groundwork ready for start working on the cloud provider, and our plan is to have an out of 3 cloud provider for vSphere with 101 feature parity with the in-tree cloud provider by 1.12 GA. That's the plan that we have. And that's pretty much it for cloud provider vSphere. We have Andrew that is going to give us an update on the CNCF CI cross-cloud project and is currently leading. Andrew, if you're on the call.
I am.
Okay, I'm just going to hand over to you. If you want to share screen or anything, you're free to.
Yeah, I can go ahead and do that. Let me bring up this. And so basically what the thing to which Fabio is referring is there's an initiative at VMware in our team to make, really, it's a larger initiative that's divided into 2 parts. The first part is have VMware show up as a column in the CNCF dashboard as one of the deployment platforms. You know, currently there's AWS, Azure, GCE, IBM, Bare Metal, and OpenStack. And we want VMware to show up there so that every night at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, they are the company with whom CNCF contracts, Volk Co-op, is deploying a Kubernetes cluster to our platform and then running conformance tests against all of the current stable versions of the software you see here. At the same time, they're deploying a second environment and running the same tests against all of the head versions. And ideally, this would always be green. It sometimes may fail because, if you can see here, it's just happens. Maybe there's a bug, but the hope is that it never fails on stable because we catch it here. And so, yeah, we've made great effort in that. We presented a scoping effort today in our team call, and we're looking at about a month to submit a pull request to the cross cloud project that accepts that will accept such a pull request to add VMware support here. Once we add a directory called vSphere or VMware here with the appropriate information, it should show up here. And I've been in contact with, and I'm going to forget his name again. Why can't I remember his name? Carpenter, not Trevor, not Travis. he gave a deep dive talk at the KubeCon EU, and he's the lead engineer for the Volk Co-op team. And I cannot remember his name. His last name's Carpenter. Oh, anyway. Yeah, he's telling us, what we need to do. He's welcomes the support. So they're working with us We've got a lot of good momentum behind the project. I mean, I'm barely doing anything other than the talking. The real work is being done by my colleagues Travis Roden and Huai Lu. So without them, you know, this wouldn't be anywhere near it is. But it hopefully, like I said, we'll have a PR submitted in a month. The other project is Test Infra. It also falls under the same aegis of cross-cloud testing, but it's specifically for the Kubernetes test project. And the goal is to have to be able to provide test coverage for aspects of Kubernetes ecosystem, so that if, for example, you were to look under SIG testing, not SIG testing, what's a better example? Wherever, let's say, for example, they may need Minikube testing because we've got some outstanding Minikube PRs. Well, we would take on Minikube testing on a vSphere platform, and it would show up somewhere here. But the same environment that we have configured on VMC, which is vSphere on Amazon hardware, will be used to provide Kubernetes testing for their test grid infrastructure. And there's no ETA on that yet. We're trying to get trying to finish scoping the dashboard and putting together the final touches on that plan, and then hopefully in the next week or two we will have a similar plan scoped for the work necessary to show up here. So if there are any questions, that's all I've got.
I do have one question, actually.
Yes, sir.
It would be great if we could, given that this is probably, it is like a time-boxed effort, but it's something that requires, you know, a lot of coordination between various people. I might suggest possibly to have like a working group set up for this work as part of the SIG.
Okay, and when I say this, I'm not trying to play devil's advocate. I'm trying to understand. Yeah, if you think that's appropriate, I guess because it's specific to VMware, should I work? Do you think we should work with SIG testing on that, or the WGCI group?
I think it might be, you know, working groups are supposed to be, time-boxed efforts that are spanning across SIGs, and this seems to have some overlap. Well, not overlap, but at least some correlation with SIG testing and possibly the working group CI.
Okay. I mean, you definitely know more about that than me, so I don't want to take up too much time here, but let's follow up on that today or tomorrow so I can understand the purpose behind it, and let's figure out if you think that you, Clint, and our team think that's necessary. I mean, it sounds like a good idea. I just don't want to spend too much time on it here without, because I'm starting from scratch there. So,
Andrew, by the way, over in the storage SIG, there's been a lot of discussion of CI tests related to storage, and Aaron Boyd of Red Hat is spearheading that. So kind of for the generic aspects of storage test, I think she's familiar with a lot of those that could run on this test infrastructure. So,
well, to be
in a position to help build this out.
Well, to be specific, Steve, like this is, there is a great YouTube video that I should make available. Travis, are you on the call, or Hui?
Yes, I am.
Can you find that YouTube link and post it in chat so I don't have to sit here and mess around my browser? I should have posted it in the
yeah.
Actually, you know what? I take it back. I can find it real quick because I posted an issue, and then it is Taylor. Taylor's his name. So let me share this in the chat. This is the deep dive on the dashboard project. And the reason I want to share this, Steve, is to highlight that we are essentially providing a platform for them to deploy on, but we're not, and at least for the dashboard, we're not providing any type of specific tests. This is literally like, can you make vSphere on VMC compatible target with their existing Terraform definitions. And we've been able to do that through a series of workarounds because vSphere and VMC has a few has a few things they disallow, so we've had to work around that. But specifically to the tests, we're not providing specific test coverage. It's more about, do these applications work together? Let's say if Prometheus 2.2.2 were to deploy on Kubernetes 1.10.2, maybe it fails. And it fails on vSphere, but not others. Why? And that can help work that out. I think what you're suggesting actually makes a lot of sense for the test grid. So, for example, let's say we're adding tests for vSAN storage against CSI. That would make a lot of sense to have, like, for VMware to pick up or define a test job in the proud definition file to show up under SIG storage.
Right, or even filed under different cloud providers. But one way or the other, there's this concept of some really generic tests that should be, if you run these tests, they should apply to all cloud providers, and then others that are going to go down code paths that are cloud provider specific.
I don't disagree with you. Here's the fun thing, and this is why there's no scoped plan for this yet. If you've looked at Prowl, this isn't the configuration. Oh, actually, maybe it is. Yeah, this is the test file. Literally, you're just telling it what tests you want to run. So you first have to define them, and then essentially you're watching the. There's a fun architecture diagram here. You're watching GitHub or the API server for events. You're pulling the commit ID, running the test, and uploading results to a bucket. The architecture is not like any CI environment I've ever seen. It's pretty unique, or interesting at least. So you basically define, it's like raising your hand and volunteering for a task. I'll do this, okay. And there's no real concept of test coverage to 100% from what I can tell, right? It's just, I will handle this aspect of it on this particular platform. So for example, they may reject a PR because maybe somebody else is already doing that on a similar enough platform. So this is really about, so there's a human element to coverage as well as the actual coverage results. I think accepting the PR is them determining whether or not it's a good PR. But I agree with you that type of generic testing, if it's not already going on for CSI, I mean, certainly we could run it on our platform and volunteer to do it.
So
okay, thanks.
The comments here, so Fabio, I think that's actually a great idea. When we think about CI/CD, Andrew, I think you described it right. We've got one CNCF initiative, which is kind of general, like run this app on top of our platform, and that's fine. But I think the Kubernetes specific stuff regarding getting on that test infra or getting on that test matrix, there may be stuff that's specific, that's more general, that I think the storage SIG is looking for, and there may be stuff specific to our platform. So I have
and they need places to run that, and maybe Red Hat is volunteering the hardware, but we've got some pretty beefy hardware out there, and we're not going to be consuming all of it for the dashboard. So we'll have plenty of resources left over that we can run so we can volunteer to take some of those Kubernetes tests. But again, I mean, that test, it's called the Test Infra Project with Test Grid. That's the next plan on which I'm going to focus once we have a plan together for the dashboard. Okay.
And I mean, it's not, so I think we're definitely going to do something in that area, right? So we're definitely going to go execute on the test infra side. And I hear you that we're going to create a plan there. What are our next steps to make sure that we're gathering the right information to help build that plan? Like, should we form that working group and invite Red Hat and Aaron to it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we want to spend the time here doing that now because I'm not the best person to tell you what those steps are. I don't have that experience. So if you and Fabio both believe that working group is a good idea, what I'd rather do is sit down with you two, with the team, and then come back to this call in 2 weeks after we get back from our conference and present that plan instead of trying to create that plan right now.
Sounds good to me. It sounds like a good plan.
So we have a plan for a plan.
Yeah, let's regroup in 2 weeks with like a sketch of the proposal and see if it actually makes sense to start forming a working group. I think it would be a good idea. Let's go over the details at at our next call in 2 weeks and figure it out. Okay.
That sounds good. And if anyone has any questions, my email address is akutz@vmware.com, or I'm on Twitter. I'm not too hard to find. So
I think
yeah,
we have a few minutes if there's any questions like right now, or yeah, they can definitely follow up offline. Maybe you want to put your email address on the chat if you.
I'm doing that right now. Yeah, great. And by the way, if anyone has experience with the test infra project, it's as clear as mud to me, and I would love any assistance anyone wants to provide. The dashboard was a little more straightforward because I've got Hui doing all the real work, and so it's pretty easy going from where I'm sitting.
Okay, if there are no questions on the CI project, I think we can move forward with the discussion phase. I think we have a couple of things on the agenda. First one is an update on the VMware Cloud Provider zone support. I have Michael and Anthony listed. Do you guys want to kick it off?
Yeah, this is Michael. So I put it in, and I just listed Anthony a second because he was kind of always so involved in getting things done. So let me just quickly share the issue that I created. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Good. Yep. Okay, so for everyone not aware of the issue, we discussed this, I think, in the first SIG call that we had, or second. So right now there's no integration between the vSphere cloud provider and the Kubernetes scheduler when it comes to topology. So making the Kubernetes scheduler aware of failure domains and zones and other stuff, which could have unintended consequences. For example, incorrect scheduling decisions by the Kubernetes scheduler, or after failure, for example, having policy or compliance violations. So what I did in this issue is first of all, I created one in the Kubernetes repository because there was another one in the VMware fork. So I made it part of the Kubernetes repository. So it's kind of in scope for everyone seeing it. And I collected all the information that we discussed and made the problem statement there, and also described a two-phased approach. I just threw it out for discussion. Phase one would be actually the first of all, integration of the zone interface in the vSphere cloud provider with some labels and text here. And the second phase would be the kind of reconciliation approach, which means that even though we got the labeling right with VCP, correctly labeling the kubelets, and so scheduler is aware of labels like A6I1 and 2, in case of DRS or HA, those labels might kind of persist, but after a vMotion or a HA restart, the labels might not be correct anymore. So in phase two, I kind of described what Anthony has kind of been doing with kubedrs, and what he showed in, I think, one of the last calls as well, is to do the reconciliation and updating the labels. But there was a discussion that I threw out there, or that actually Hannes, who's also in the call, jumped in asking for, should we actually change the labels after a vMotion or HA, or should we stick with them and let a reconciliation loop migrate, for example, VMs back and get them in sync again? So the discussion is all in there, and there was like an idea that I had yesterday that came to my mind, is that maybe from a vSphere operator perspective, it would be good to have a CRD operator or a controller that a vSphere operator could work with. For example, query the status of the vSphere environment from Kubernetes perspective, saying, for example, this worker we're on, or the kubelet one, is compliant in terms of the labels and the affinity settings, etc. Or worker 2 is out of compliance, for example, a DRS anti-affinity rule is violated. Now, what he can do is dig deeper into describing what this worker actually does, and displayed a recommendation that could, for example, come from DRS and then initiate a rebalance to get the worker back in shape. Meaning that it's an opt-in. It's not an automatic way of doing things. It's probably what we also do with DRS and HA when it comes to recommendations that an administrator can apply and follow based on this scenario and the situation. So that's what I just threw out yesterday, and I'm happy to have discussions and feedback on this idea. If Anthony is in the call, I'll let him comment, and maybe he has something to add as well. I'm not sure if he's in the call.
I'm the core. I think you summarized pretty well. And we have the intern on board working with Doug on this specific issue, and he's quickly ramping up, and hopefully we'll see some progress in a week or two.
Cool, yeah. I saw that Doug jumped in as well, and basically answered the question that we had is how can we get the labels or the tags queried from vCenter, and he came up with this idea of using the namespace database or having like an interface query the local ASXI host, which actually would be what we want, but I just didn't have a way or understanding how this works. And it looks like this is solvable, and it's good that we are making progress on this side. So that's my update on the issue. Any comments? Maybe Hannes or someone else involved?
I might have a question for Doug. Remember we chat about this a few days back. I remember we talked about doing an integration of vCenter labels for GoVMommy.
Yep.
Yeah, vCenter labels are not part of the vModel API, so they're not part of the traditional SOAP API that we all know and love. So that is something we have to implement on the side on GoVMommy, just like the SSO stuff that Doug has done a few weeks back. I don't know if you put any thought in this. I think it was like a good approach for this going forward.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's no question that we're going to need access to the tagging API to implement this. Some of the details and implementation can still be sorted out, but the tagging API, namespace DB, and another issue that's been outstanding for a while with vCSIM that would give us the ability to use property collector for incremental updates. So VM migration is one of those examples that would make this sort of thing much, much easier to test and develop against. And then there's one more issue that I'm forgetting about, but there's a couple that I think are in support of this that we definitely need and we can start on now. And then, as that work gets kicked off, we can iron out the design and details of how we're going to actually make this happen.
Doug, this is Andrew. Things may have changed quite a bit since I last looked at this, but when you were able to, and maybe you can't anymore, but used to, when you would register a server-side plugin, you would get to I'm just saying you could basically piggyback on that with some of the, when you register it, basically use it as a simple state machine if you don't want to use labels for some reason. Maybe just register a custom plugin for tracking this data.
What kind of plugin is that?
I'll have to follow up on this. Back in the day, and I mean like 5-6 years ago, there were both the client-side plugins, but also the server-side plugin that you could register, and you were able to define new properties in the SDK to use when you did so. Mm-hmm. And I thought if you wanted to define some properties specific to the domain that this entails, maybe that might be useful. I don't know.
Yeah, so you might be referring to vCenter extensions.
Yes, thank you.
But even independent of that, there is an older API that was not called tagging. It's custom fields or custom
yeah,
properties.
Exactly. And when you created an extension, you were able to define custom fields that you would create. And you're saying that's independent of the extension.
Well, They are independent, but then the other issue, if you compare the custom fields to tags, is that if you create a custom field definition, it applies to every single instance of that entity. So for a virtual machine, for example, if you have VMs where those custom properties don't apply, they're going to show up anyway, and there's no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you probably don't want that. I know not everyone likes to use labels. I was just trying to come up with a alternative out of the box solution, but thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, the vSphere model is well defined and rigid, stable, whatever you want to call it at this point. And the tags are just a way for us to kind of define our own synthetic model, for mapping things between Kubernetes and the vSphere model. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Looks like there's a clear path forward on this. Doug, do you know if we have this work planned already for adding tech support? I mean, I know what we talked about, but I forgot the details.
So Gaetan just started with us on Monday, and he's already looking at the tag API. Mm-hmm. But then I know I still have yet to respond to Michael's latest comment on here. So I think we'll just need to spend some more time on the design phase of this. But again, that the other work in support of that I think is pretty clear, and that can start now. Well,
you just have maybe a issue on the GoVMommy repo to reference for this work, like the implementation of the tagging API.
Yeah. The issues that I mentioned are actually in GoVMommy already, and I think we have our internal tracker, and I created a short-term epic that collects those.
Yeah.
And now that we have the external cloud provider repo, we can move that there. Yeah,
let's just hold off on adding issues to the new repo because I want to have all the stuff in place. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah, when it's ready.
Yeah.
Hey, Doug, I had a question about this, or maybe it's not appropriate for right now, but I'll take this offline because I don't know enough about the problem space. Thank you.
Okay. I see that, Michael, you have another thing on the discussion list, customer interest in SAP Project Gardener.
Yeah, so this was something that I think Swisscom raised to me yesterday, but also another customer. So for everyone not familiar with Gardener, let me just open. There was a recent blog post on what they do. So basically, it's making Kubernetes the infrastructure abstraction for all SAP workloads being deployed, like be it HANA databases or even Cloud Foundry environments. That makes SAP able to have cross-cloud infrastructure kind of abstraction. And so Gardener is their way of, first of all, abstracting the infrastructure with Kubernetes and also having a stable interface where they then deploy their control plane components in the custom environment. So I think when they started the work on Gardener, that was before SIG cluster lifecycle and also outside of SIG API, cluster API. But since much of the stuff is kind of related, they are really active in both SIGs and trying to drive this forward, which is related to the work of other folks, for example, around KubeCon and kind of the Kubernetes deployment mechanisms. So I had customers asking, like personally me, but also in the SIG community call, Kubernetes SIG community call, where SAP presented Gardener in a demo. There was a question in the chat. So I just watched the recording, so I couldn't see from whom it was, but there was a question on, do you also support on-premises environments? And the situation is that SAP defines, like SIG cluster lifecycle, SAP defines a machine manager, meaning that is something that you have to implement. So it's an interface, a Go interface that you have to implement. And based on that, they are able to incorporate the infrastructure, specific infrastructure, for example, vSphere, in their deployment topology. So I'm just bringing this out here because I think, first of all, it would be good to participate in there if we are not already participating. So I'm not kind of deeply involved in the cluster lifecycle. But second, since customers were asking for it, and currently there's no VMware provider for Gardener or cluster lifecycle that I'm aware of, I think it might be good to at least look into it and respond. I have some contacts at SAP that we can reach out to, but I just wanted to throw it out for discussion here.
This is definitely interesting. I think I've seen these people at KubeCon. I think they reached out at some point.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing, I'm not sure if you want to, given you have the better context in this, if you want to like start understanding better what would entail to start bringing VMware support for this Gardener project. If you want to like send around an email, maybe invite them to join the SIG call next time, so we can maybe have a demo and figure it out. What would be the best course of action going forward.
Good. Yeah, makes sense.
Take that.
Yeah. I'll put some notes in the agenda for like the interface that's a basic interface that we have to comply with. But I'm also going to reach out to them and let them demo and discuss this. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sounds good.
This is Kenny. So the Gardener team actually presented last week on the Kubernetes community meeting. I just put it in the chat. There's a YouTube link, and it's around the 26, 27-minute mark is when they start. They give a live demo of it working. I believe it fails a little bit towards the end, but it was interesting. Very slick UI, in my opinion, too. I mean, it was a pretty cool project. I had also asked them in chat. I asked them about VMware support. They said that they were talking to a few people. I don't know who it is on the VMware side, but they pretty much just said that it is open source. So they are looking for contributors from VMware to make that happen. They weren't necessarily going to do all the work to do it.
Exactly, Kenny. Yeah.
Yeah, it will be great to have them here and figure out what's the best path forward. I mean, if it's something that will be of value for people running Kubernetes, and there's missing support for VMware infrastructure, I think that's exactly what the SIG is for. So I think making a connection and have the discussion here would be probably the best next step.
Yep, we'll do. Cool.
Awesome. Last item on the agenda: charter and security context. Tim, I guess it's Tim Pepper.
This is just something that had gone by on the Kubernetes dev list and has kind of been bubbling through steering and other discussion forums, I think, for the last almost a month now, maybe, but kind of formalizing security contexts. And there was it's been officially added to the project template page, and now there's a call out as you're doing your charters for SIGs to make sure you include that, and then on any repos to put that file in the particular format. There's links there in the agenda, but just wanted to bring it up here and suggest that the SIG identify a security lead or two to be able to field things that come in from if there happen to be security vulnerabilities related to this SIG.
Thanks for that, because I totally missed that. I've seen some emails with something that had to do with security on the subject, but I would say that I skipped that for the most part. So that's great. I didn't pay attention. So
and then related to that I feel like there was an issue open on drafting the charter, but then, or was that just in the agenda a couple meetings ago that the charter was being drafted? But maybe it's something we ought to look at closing on, getting that done and posted.
I don't have it on the top of my mind. Maybe Steve remembers. Steve, do you remember about who was taking on writing down the charter for SIG VMware? I mean, we have a charter which is like the short version of it. I think the request here is to write up the like full length charter. Is that correct, Tim?
Yeah, there's like a structured format now for SIG charters.
Yeah,
So Steve,
I think we remember that when we were just getting kicked off, and some of that stuff appeared to be in flux. So maybe we kind of missed the transition point and aren't fully compliant. But Fabio and I will work it out, and one of us will get on that.
yeah, I'll take care of the security context and figure out who's going to be the best contact for that. Yeah, Steve, let's make sure that we address the charter thing before the next meeting. I think it's pretty important now.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, we ran out of things, but I noticed it looks like Bryson showed up in the participants list. And at the beginning of the meeting, he wasn't there, but I wanted to ask you, Bryson, if you might have a chance to review that draft blog that we talked about a few meetings ago. I don't know. I see him in the participants list, but who knows? He might be unable to unmute or something. I guess we can move on.
Yep. I don't think we have anything else to discuss this week, but if Bryson hears the recording or he's muted, just reach out to Steve on Slack or by email. And I think that's it, unless there's any more questions or topic for discussion. I think we're going to see.
I have one quick update.
Go
I
ahead.
didn't add it to the agenda, but we talked a couple times about adding a SAML token authentication to VCP, and that's actually been merged in Kubernetes master.
Awesome.
There's a couple things that's linked to happen. One, I'm going to release a GoVC, new version of GoVC that you actually need to create the solution users. There's other ways, but most of them involve actually logging into the vCenter server. I'm going to write some docs and at some point a blog, but the docs would be enough for people to try it out. I did take or leave out a couple of things that we could maybe look at in 1.12 related to configuration. So I didn't add any new config fields. It just uses the existing username, password, and if your username is PEM encoded, then it just assumes that that's a public key, and then your password's the private key. And the other decision was just to always issue a new token when logging in. So we could look later at using a token that's issued by some other means, and that could be through the configuration. But part of the reason I left that out is the VCP uses gconfig, which is like the Go version of git config, and it's not very user friendly when it comes to values that have more than one line. So if you have your certificate, which is typically you have a .pem file or .cert .key, and there's new lines in there, you actually need to escape them to be able to configure it. So it's a little bit of a hassle if you're doing it manually. If it's automated, it's not so bad, but I think we'll revisit those improvements because functionally it's there. So yeah, by the next meeting, I'll have some kind of docs and be able to share that. The other update related to that, I don't think anyone from the Sabu team is here, but they did add support for using the Kubernetes secrets mechanism for VCP credentials. So that would apply to both the plain text username, password, or key pair. It is just base 64 encoding, so it doesn't help that much, but at least for username, password, it helps a little bit. And yeah, that's it.
Hey, Doug.
Yep.
thanks for raising this, because I also wanted to add this when I saw that they now supporting secrets for the vSphere-Conf. But as you said, that it's kind of base 64, not supposed to be like any stronger from a security perspective. When you write the blog post, can you kind of incorporate all the different ways to configure basically the secret or the authentication mechanism? Because there are customers running older versions of Kubernetes, and I think it would be good to at least have an understanding of the 3 ways to do it. Would that work for you?
Yeah, definitely. I'll include that.
Cool.
And then I guess the one other thing we had discussed early on around this issue, the idea of being able to have an external authentication mechanism, because really for other than logging in, VCP just needs a SOAP session cookie to do all these other operations. So, that would be another option going forward. And then the, protection of those secrets would be that much more flexible, and customers could use, whatever they want.
Yeah, because I had some customers asking for different Kubernetes environments, how much security risk does exist, or there was some wrong information out there that we need to work on. So it would be good to have one blog post describing the current situation and alternatives. That would be great.
Okay.
Cool.
Awesome. Great update. We finally have something for 111 as well. That's great. Okay. Any other things? Otherwise, I'm going to give you back about 12 minutes of your time. All right. Going once. Going twice. Bye, everybody. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.